Hello everyone, I am the Storyteller Daily. Tonight, I bring you stories that may help you drift into sleep, though they may also keep your eyes open a little longer. Before we begin, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Leave a comment to tell me where are you watching from and at what time. Now, sit back, relax, and step into the story. The cottage never learned my name, but it recognized my footsteps. Floorboards greeted me with soft creaks as I moved from room to room, mapping the chill of late autumn across the flagstones. I told myself I had come for quiet 3 weeks to finish a restoration report and to sleep better than I had in the city. The wind made a low sea out of the hedgerows, and somewhere a kettle ticked as it cooled. Sheep bells chimed from the hill like distant crockery. Ordinary sounds, comfortable. I kept my notebook open on the kitchen table, penciling dates and timber types, tracing the grain with a thumb until it felt like the cottage's pulse. When night fell, the house tightened. Beams settled with gentle sighs. I set a mug down. The clock in the hall counted a steady heartbeat. Then, beneath the parlor floor, something answered the clock. A faint tap. 3 times. Paused. 3 again. I crouched, ear near the skirting, telling myself it was just pipes. The cottage had no pipes there. Another sequence came, more patient than urgent, like knuckles thinking. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I whispered, hello, to the empty room, feeling foolish. From under the floor, very softly, a voice whispered back my name. I didn't move at first. The sound hung in the air thin, unfinished, as though the floorboards themselves were exhaling my name. I waited for a second whisper, but only the kettle clicked again, contracting as it cooled. A trick of the ears. I told myself, houses speak. They sigh and stretch. Old wood remembers storms. It must have been that. Still, when I rose, the back of my neck was cold. I spent the next hour walking through each room with a torch, tapping walls, checking for loose boards. The cottage was a single story. Nothing beneath except earth and stone. No cellar, no crawl space. The beam that ran across the parlor floor had once been part of a ship. I noted that detail when I'd first arrived, proud of my little discovery. Perhaps the hollow I'd heard was air shifting through old joints. At midnight, I set up my recorder habit from previous restorations. The ticking clock kept rhythm with the soft hiss of tape. For half an hour, silence. Then, just as I was ready to switch it off, there came the tapping again, slower now, deliberate. I leaned close, hearing each knock form a pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse. A code. I pressed my hand flat against the timber. It was colder than before. Beneath my palm, a faint vibration pulsed once, twice, then stopped. Draft, I muttered. Or some bloody animal. Trend contenter. I didn't believe that. There were no burrows under the foundation, no sign of infestation, and animals don't call people by name. I went to bed anyway, leaving the recorder running. The wind scratched branches against the windows. I counted the beats in the dark, waiting for the tapping to return. When morning came, I brewed tea and played back the tape. For 28 minutes, only ambient noise. Then a quiet interval and a whisper. Unmistakable. I'm here. I know Morales say. The voice was neither male nor female, only close. I froze, teacup halfway to my lips. The next sound was softer wood shifting, but after it, faintly, laughter, fragile as air leaking from the walls. I replayed that section again and again, lowering the volume each time. The laughter didn't change. It was patient, hollow, as if waiting for me to respond. That night, I moved my mattress into the parlor, right above where the voice had come from. I told myself I wanted to understand the structure better, to feel how the house settled in darkness. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't ignore a voice that already knew my name. And as the fire burned low, I could hear it again tapping, like fingernails on wood counting my breaths. By the third night, the pattern had changed. The tapping no longer waited for silence, it created it. Every other sound in the cottage faded before it began, as if the air itself paused to listen. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to forget how to tick. I lay on the mattress in the parlor, the recorder beside me. The flame in the hearth had long died, but the faint glow of embers painted red veins across the floor, and through that thin, flickering light, I saw the boards tremble, almost breathing. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Then, a longer scrape, like a nail dragging slowly from one plank to the next. I spoke aloud, more to anchor myself than to summon anything. Who's there? A to you, bees. Silence, then a single knock in reply. I sat upright, pulse loud in my ears. I tried logic again. Perhaps sound traveled through soil, maybe there was an underground stream, or shifting roots. I even stepped outside, into the wet chill of the night, circling the cottage with my torch. The hedgerows whispered only with wind. The stars were smothered by cloud. When I returned inside, I heard something new, footsteps. Not below now, but above. They crossed the ceiling from end to end, slow, measured, impossibly heavy for such an old structure. Dust fell in soft spirals onto my blanket. There was no attic, no second floor. I shone the torch upward, following the sound. Each step landed exactly where I stood moments before, tracing me through the rooms. The rhythm was almost human, but slightly wrong, each interval a breath too long, each heel drag too soft, as though the walker's feet weren't quite touching. Then the footsteps stopped directly above me. I held my breath. The house held it. A faint click, like a latch unlocking somewhere deep inside the walls, echoed through the timber. Then, nothing. I left the recorder running and fled to the kitchen. I poured tea just for the noise of it, watching steam twist into the lamplight. When I returned, the parlor door was ajar, though I remembered closing it. The recorder light still blinked red. I pressed rewind, then play. The static hummed for a few seconds before the knocks began again, clearer this time, closer to the microphone. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, then a word, drawn out through the wood grain, distorted by the hiss. Below. I dropped the device. The sound continued even without it. The floor itself was whispering. I backed against the wall, unable to look away as a dark stain began to bloom between the boards. It wasn't liquid, it was shadow, rising like breath through cracks. The boards swelled, flexing as if something beneath them shifted its weight, pressing upward to listen. I wanted to run, but curiosity rooted me. If something called my name, I had to see its face. The tapping grew frantic, matching the pace of my heartbeat. Tap, 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 until the entire floor seemed to shiver. And then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence was worse. I realized I was standing in the middle of the parlor, over the very spot that had spoken to me. Something cold traced along my ankle, soft, deliberate, like a finger testing the distance to skin. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs, but when I lifted the lantern, there was nothing there. Only floorboards, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. That's when I heard it again, faint but unmistakable, a heartbeat. not mine. From below, I couldn't sleep that night. The cottage felt awake, aware every beam and joint humming faintly, like breath caught in wood. I sat by the hearth, the lantern flickering low, the recorder on the floor beside me. I told myself I'd stay up and prove it was all in my head, just a structure expanding with cold, just old timber pretending to have a voice. But when the clock struck 2, the air shifted. The flames bent sideways, though no wind entered. The kettle in the kitchen began to rattle softly, lid clinking like loose teeth, and from beneath the parlor floor came a slow, rhythmic knock. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Then silence, then a breath. It rose through the boards as if exhaled by the earth itself. My name followed, broken into syllables, as though someone below was learning how to speak. Da, The sound filled the air around me. I backed toward the door, hand shaking on the lantern. "Who are you?" I said. "What do you want?" "They what today?" The voice sighed, almost amused, and the knocking turned into scratching. Long, slow arcs that circled beneath my feet. The boards flexed. Dust sifted down from the rafters. Then the first board lifted. Only a fraction of an inch, but enough to show darkness beneath. Breathing, my stomach tightened. The air smelled of damp soil and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. I stepped closer without meaning to, lantern trembling. The light found movement, a grey fingertip pushing through the crack. It was too thin, the nail long and splintered like wood fibre. It withdrew, then pushed again, widening the gap. I dropped to my knees and grabbed a crowbar from my tool bag. My hands moved before my mind caught up the instinct to see stronger than the urge to flee. I wedged the metal into the seam, pried, and the board came up with a groan. Underneath was darkness. Not soil, not stone, just hollow space. I lowered the lantern, expecting to see roots or foundations. Instead, I saw a shape pale and curved like a shoulder turned away from the light. The voice came from that void, whispering upward. Cold, so cold. My breath fogged. The lantern flickered once, twice, and went out. I swung the crowbar blindly. It hit nothing but air, then wood. The floor vibrated with the blow. Something beneath hissed a wet, dragging sound, and the next moment, the entire plank beneath me cracked open. A hand emerged, not quite human, too long, too grey, its surface slick with something that gleamed like dew. It reached for my ankle, curling delicately around it, as if to steady itself rather than attack. The touch was freezing, not icy, but the deep cold of earth that never sees sun. I yanked free and stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. The thing pushed further through the opening a shoulder, then half a head. Its hair was sodden, its skin patterned with faint wood grain. Its mouth moved, shaping words without sound. Then, slowly, its eyes opened. They were empty, not black, just blank, like knots in timber. The floor moaned as the rest of it tried to rise. I grabbed my coat and ran, crashing into the hall, out through the front door, into the rain. The wind tore the breath from me. Behind, the cottage shuddered, boards snapping like ribs. I didn't stop until I reached the low stone wall at the edge of the field. The house stood still, a dark silhouette against the night. The door I'd left open swung gently, creaking with each gust. Then, from that distance, I saw movement through the parlor window, a flicker of lantern light, and the faint outline of a man bending over the floor. But I had taken the lantern with me. The light winked once, then vanished. By dawn, the rain had turned the field to mist. The cottage stood grey and still, as though nothing had stirred inside it. I watched it from the stone wall, shivering beneath my coat, waiting for the courage to return. Every rational thought insisted that I should leave, drive back to the village, report something, anything. Yet curiosity dug deeper than fear. I needed to know what I'd seen. I needed to prove that the mind can sculpt ghosts from exhaustion. When the sun was fully up, I went back. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was heavy with damp and smoke. The plank I'd prized loose still gaped open, but the hollow beneath looked empty now. No movement, no whisper, only the faint smell of earth after rain. I almost laughed with relief. I spent the morning cleaning, pretending I was simply resuming my work. I replaced the broken board, swept dust, brewed tea, normal rituals, each one a small exorcism. By evening, I almost believed it had all been a waking dream, some mix of fatigue and the cottage's groaning timber. When night came, I built a fire and sat by it, forcing myself to write my report, paragraph after paragraph about oak beams and 18th century joinery, each word a step back towards sanity. Outside, the wind had gone still. The silence was gentle, complete. I thought, absurdly, that the house was grateful. Until the recorder clicked on by itself. The red light blinked. I hadn't touched it since the night before. The tape began to turn, hissing faintly. I leaned closer. There was nothing at first then. A voice. My own. "It's cold," it said, exactly as I'd heard from the hole. So cold. Just 10. The words were followed by a scrape, a long, dragging movement. Then, another whisper, softer this time. "Down here?" I froze. The room around me darkened, the fire lowering itself to embers as though the air had been drawn away. The recorder continued to hiss. Beneath the floorboards came a sound I recognized too well, the slow rhythm of knocking. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. I backed toward the door, but the knocking followed, spreading under my feet as though whatever lay beneath was moving with me. I dropped the recorder. It clattered, the tape still spinning, and through the static, I heard something new, faint, distorted, yet unmistakably human, breathing. Not 1 breath, 2, then 3, in time with my own. The floor beneath me began to pulse gently, up and down, as if the house itself were drawing air. The boards swelled, exhaled, and somewhere deep inside the walls, I heard the kettle begin to whistle. I ran to the kitchen. The kettle sat cold and empty. The whistle came from inside the spout, a hollow tone that grew sharper, louder, until it became a shriek. I pulled it from the stove, but the sound didn't stop. It filled the whole house now, vibrating through the beams. Then, beneath that piercing noise, another voice joined, not a whisper this time, but a hoarse imitation of speech. "Let me up." The words crawled across the air, low and ragged, each syllable scraping against wood. The floor behind me groaned. I turned just in time to see the plank I'd replaced shift slightly, as if something underneath had pressed its hand against it. Then it stilled again. The whistle stopped. Only silence remained. I waited for another sound, another breath. Nothing came. The cottage looked peaceful, even tender, in the glow of the dying fire. I told myself it was finished, that whatever I'd disturbed had gone back to sleep. But as I gathered my things to leave, I realized the recorder had stopped blinking. It was off, unplugged. And yet, from its tiny speaker, a faint voice whispered, "You're still standing over me." I continued. I didn't move. The voice from the recorder was so faint it almost dissolved into the fire's crackle, but it said enough to freeze every nerve in my body. "You're still standing over me." No. I looked down. The board beneath my boots, the one I had replaced, was trembling. Slowly, almost tenderly, as if a breath were rising from the earth itself. The grain shifted beneath the varnish, spreading outward like ripples across water. I stumbled backward. The recorder hissed, the tape spooling faster than it should, whispering again, each word stretched thin by static. "You woke me." Then the plank lifted, not cracked this time, peeled open, curling upward like a lid. The darkness below was thicker than night, breathing, swallowing the lamplight whole. Something moved inside it, a hand, then a wrist, then the silhouette of a shoulder, grey skin streaked with soil, eyes hollow as the gaps between boards. It pushed upward, groaning through lips that weren't quite lips. I waited. It rasped. I bolted for the door. The latch wouldn't move. It felt fused to the frame, damp and immovable. The windows clouded with mist from the inside, as though the house itself exhaled around me. Behind me, the thing rose higher. Its voice scraped the air like stone on stone. "Don't leave me here again. One's one, buys one." The words hit me harder than the fear itself. Again, it had known someone before, someone who'd stood where I stood now. The fire guttered out, and I was swallowed by dark. The only sound left was the slow drag of its body against the floor and the endless, patient knock of fingers against timber. I grabbed the lantern and struck a match. The light flared, and there it was, fully upright. It wasn't whole, not anymore. Parts of it looked carved, its ribs like warped beams, its jaw half joined by splinters. It was the cottage's missing voice given shape. It reached toward me, movements uneven, jerky. Its fingers left faint streaks of black where they touched the walls, as though painting veins into the wood. I swung the lantern, smashing it across its arm. Fire burst, oil spilling in a flare of orange. The creature shrieked, a sound deeper than lungs, something like wind tearing through a hollow tree. The flame raced along its arm, caught the floor, spread in a circle around us. The heat was instant, violent. I ran for the hallway. The door finally gave way. I crashed into the night, coughing, eyes watering from smoke. Behind me, the cottage burned in silence. No collapse, no screams, only the faint, rhythmic tapping that somehow rose above the crackle of fire. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the field. The first light of dawn was leaking over the hills. My breath came ragged. My hands stank of smoke and resin. When I turned back, the cottage was only a silhouette wrapped in flame. The windows glowed red like open mouths. For a moment, it looked almost alive, its shape bending in the heat, beams arching like ribs. And then the roof caved in. The sound that followed was not wood breaking, nor stone falling. It was a sigh, deep, relieved, final. I stood there until the fire died to cinders. Birds began to sing, tentative, as though testing if the air was safe again. The wind returned, carrying the smell of ash and soil. I left at sunrise, walking until the road bent toward the village. When I finally reached the car, I realized I still clutched the recorder. Its light was dead. The tape had melted inside, warped from heat. Yet when I pressed play, it turned once, sluggishly. A voice, faint, far beneath static, whispered just one word. "Home. What weaning?" The recorder stopped. I threw it into the ditch and drove until the signal bars on my phone returned, until I saw another house, another human figure, Still, even now, when the night grows too still, I hear it. 3 short knocks, 3 long, 3 short beneath the floorboards of wherever I sleep. As if the cottage had followed, as if it had built itself again, just below the earth, waiting for me to listen. It's been 3 weeks since I left the cottage. The local paper called it an accident, faulty wiring, spontaneous fire. The villagers spoke of old timber and bad luck. No one mentioned the whispers, the way the air had breathed. They never do. I rented a flat above a bakery in town. The scent of bread fills the mornings. The hum of traffic keeps the nights ordinary. I tell myself that's what I wanted all along, ordinary. But ordinary doesn't explain why I still wake at 3:03 every night. The first week, I thought it was nerves. The second, coincidence. By the third, I stopped pretending. Each night, at that exact time, a sound begins soft, distant, but always beneath me. 3 short knocks, 3 long, 3 short. I moved the bed. The sound moved with it. Last night, I pressed my ear to the floorboards. The wood was cold, smoother than it should have been, and I swear I heard the faintest intake of breath. When I whispered, "Is someone there?" the air against my ear warmed, and a familiar voice whispered back, "You brought me home. I'd tendency as willed." I shot upright, heart hammering, but there was only stillness. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, normal things. This morning, I called the landlord to ask about the building's foundation. He told me the bakery was rebuilt after a fire 30 years ago on the site of an old cottage, shipped here piece by piece for preservation. He laughed when I asked if the floors were original. "Oh yes," he said, "oak beams, 18th century, they've got a life of their own." I letted one sein. I dropped the phone. Now, as I write this, the knocking has started again, steady, patient, almost kind. I can smell the faint sweetness of damp soil. The light flickers once, twice, and somewhere under the boards, something shifts, breathing in time with me. I whisper my own name, just to see what happens. From below, the floor whispers it back. And then, very softly, "Let me out." Had dropped in the forest didn't welcome sound. Every footstep I made dissolved into the wet moss, and even the air seemed reluctant to move. I'd come alone, camera strapped to my chest, tent packed light, eager to capture the dawn mist that locals called the breath of the mountain. They also warned me never to stay after dark. I laughed at that part. Warnings are just another kind of invitation. By late afternoon, the sun bled gold through the branches. I found a clearing beside a narrow stream and pitched my tent. The forest smelled of pine and rain, heavy but clean. Somewhere far off, a bird called once and didn't call again. As I set up the tripod, I heard it for the first time, a soft echo of my own movement. Half a second behind, when I zipped my tent, the same sound followed. When I coughed, something in the trees repeated it, faint and breathless. I stood still, listening. Silence. Then, from somewhere beyond the stream, my own voice called back, quiet, uncertain, like someone testing the word for the first time. "Hello. Welly bay do ex to do's." It was my voice, and it was coming closer through the trees. I froze where I stood, hands still clutching the tent zip. The echo of my own voice hung in the air, thin, unfinished, before fading into the rustle of branches. The stream gurgled softly, innocent, as if to insist nothing had happened. I waited. The forest waited with me. Then a crow cried somewhere to the east, breaking the spell. "Sound carries strangely here," I muttered, forcing a laugh that fell flat. My voice sounded too loud, too human. I tried to dismiss it as an echo, perhaps from the ridge behind me. The slopes formed a natural bowl. Any noise might bounce back, distorted. It made sense. It had to. I unpacked my camera, adjusted the tripod, and tried to focus on light instead of silence. But as the evening sank deeper, the forest grew heavier. The air thickened, damp with fog, and every now and then I caught the faintest repetition of my own movements, my boot scraping a rock. My backpack shifting against my shoulder played back half a heartbeat later. When I spoke again, testing, "Hello?" Junri tensed. The reply came fainter this time, delayed, blurred. "Hello?" The same pitch, the same rhythm, only softer. I smiled uneasily. "Wind through the trees," I whispered. The wind didn't answer, but the forest seemed to breathe with me, slow, deliberate, the way lungs fill when someone listens too closely. At dusk, I lit a small fire. The smoke rose straight into the mist. My torch cast a tight circle of light. Beyond it, the trees stood endless and black. I told myself I'd record ambient forest sounds for my project, so I set the camera to video, lens facing the stream. Hours passed. I nearly fell asleep to the crackle of the fire when a new sound cut through it, footsteps on wet leaves. Not mine, not echo. Too heavy, too measured. They stopped just short of the light's edge. I peered into the dark. Heart hammering. "Is someone there?" I called. The forest held its breath. Then, from that same spot, the same tone, my own voice replied, "Is someone there? We said be happy." I stood. The fire spat as I kicked dirt onto it, reducing the light to embers. "Stop it," I whispered to the dark. From the trees came a faint laugh, low, drawn out, and exactly like mine. The fog thickened, swallowing the clearing. My torch flickered once, twice, and died. Somewhere beyond the stream, the laugh repeated again, closer now. The forest became a room made of breath. Fog drifted so thick that my torch beam felt solid, breaking against it like water. I turned slowly, trying to see shapes between the trunks, but everything blurred into shades of grey. The laugh had stopped, yet the echo of it still trembled inside my ribs. I whispered, "Who's there?" "Enragen." The same words floated back quiet, uncertain, from somewhere to my left. I took a step that way. The mud gave a soft squelch. One heartbeat later, the sound repeated behind me. Step. Echo. Step. Echo. Each imitation perfectly timed, as though the forest were rehearsing. My breathing grew shallow. I swung the torch, catching only drifting mist. "Enough," I shouted, desperate. The forest went utterly still. No birds, no wind, only the sound of water trickling through the stream. Then came a reply, not whispered but spoken rough, uneven, like my own voice trying to remember how words worked. "Enough." That the rationed. The syllables scraped, dragging against the fog. I stumbled backward toward my tent, fumbling for the zipper, heart hammering so loud I could hardly hear anything else. Inside, I zipped the flap and pressed my palms to the thin nylon, waiting. At first, nothing. Then, a single tap knuckle against fabric from the outside. 1, 2, 3. I held my breath. The taps moved higher, brushing across the surface like fingers tracing my outline from the other side. Shh. The sound wasn't human. It was air pushed through a throat that didn't quite understand how to shape it. I turned off the torch. Darkness swallowed me whole. I listened, every rustle magnified. Every heartbeat, a drum. The tapping stopped. Then came the footsteps again, circling the tent this time. Slow, deliberate. Each step matched the rhythm of my pulse. I grabbed my camera, switched it to record, and pointed it toward the tent wall where the sound was loudest. The lens trembled in my hands. Outside, something leaned close enough for the fabric to dent inward. I could see the faint impression of a face, my face pressed against the thin material. The mouth opened. Cold, it whispered, and I recognized the tone. It wasn't mocking me anymore. It was copying. I tore open the tent and swung the camera toward the voice. Nothing but fog. The air rippled, though like heat above asphalt, and the echo of my own gasp came from everywhere at once. The trees began to knock, branches tapping together in perfect rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. My heartbeat joined it, faster now. The forest answered every breath, every shiver, mirroring me until I couldn't tell which sound was mine. Desperate, I turned off the camera and clamped my hands over my ears. It didn't help. The sound came from inside my head now, my own voice whispering, "You shouldn't have answered. Well, too rashid." I stumbled toward the stream, half blind, trying to orient myself by the water's noise. But even that betrayed me. The gentle gurgle began to repeat backward, as though the forest itself were rewinding. Then I saw movement, a pale flicker across the water, taller than a man, shaped like smoke but walking. It tilted its head, listening to the echo of my ragged breath. And when I spoke without thinking, just a trembling "please," it said the word with me, perfectly in time, perfectly mine. I ran. Branches clawed at my sleeves, wet leaves slapped my face, and the ground vanished beneath every step. The fog swallowed light faster than I could move through it. Behind me, my own voice shouted, "Stop." Only it wasn't me. It came from every direction, louder, more commanding, until even the trees seemed to echo it. I tripped over a root and fell to my knees. The camera slid into the mud. Lens cracked, still recording. Its red light blinked through the mist like a small, bleeding eye. I reached for it, then froze. Footsteps. Slow, careful, coming closer. Through the fog, I saw a figure emerging between the trunks. It walked like me, same height, same shape, same tilt of the head. Its shoulders twitched in the same rhythm as my breathing. When I raised a hand, it raised one too. A perfect mirror, delayed by a heartbeat. I whispered, "Who are you?" The sweary fetus, the shape tilted its head, smiled faintly, and answered in my voice, "Who are you?" The pre-maces for the prey pause. My stomach turned. "Stop copying me," I hissed. "Stop copying me," it repeated exactly, tone for tone. I took a step back. It took one forward. Then it began to lag, its mimicry slipping half a second behind. Each movement became rougher, twitching, as though struggling to keep up with the original. "Stay away from me," I shouted. "Stay away." It didn't finish the sentence. Its mouth hung open too wide, and the last syllable fractured into a sound like tearing cloth. The fog thickened, drawing us closer until I could smell it: wet soil, mold, and the faint iron scent of blood. Its eyes were grey, blank, but full of a strange shine, as if reflecting a light that wasn't there. I grabbed the tripod beside me and swung. The figure caught it effortlessly, like a dance move it already knew. The metal bent in its hands. I turned and ran toward the stream. My boots splashed through the water, cold cutting up to my knees. The echo of my steps multiplied 3 sets. 5, a chorus of me sprinting behind myself. When I looked back, I saw dozens of silhouettes in the fog, each one moving as I moved, staggering slightly, out of sync, a crowd of broken mirrors. They whispered together in a low harmony, my name drawn out until it lost meaning. Adam, Adam. The sound rolled through the forest like wind through hollow wood. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stumbled up the far bank, gasping, and saw through the fog the dim outline of a wooden watchtower, an old ranger's post, half collapsed, tilting over a shallow pit. I bolted for it, slammed the door shut behind me, and dropped the latch. The silence that followed was immense. Only my breathing filled the small space. Dust floated in the beam of my torch. The walls groaned, thin as bark. I peered through a crack in the wood. Outside, the fog moved like a living thing. The shapes still stood along the stream, motionless now, all facing the tower. Then, one by one, they tilted their heads in unison. I whispered, "Please go." The Spingular Spataning Creates. And from outside, a single voice, my voice replied, perfectly calm. "We already are you." They 16. Something slammed against the door. The latch jumped. I shoved my shoulder against it. Another blow came, heavier, making the wood bow inward. Then all at once, silence again. I listened. Through the crack, the fog seemed to thin. The clearing was empty. I allowed myself one long breath of relief until I heard the faint creak of floorboards inside the tower, behind me. And then a whisper, directly at my ear, soft and wet. "You're late, Dade." I spun round so fast the torch slipped from my hand. The light rolled across the floorboards, painting frantic circles before it settled in the corner. Nothing stood there, just empty air, and the sound of my own pulse filling the tower. "Get a hold of yourself," I whispered. My voice cracked. The tower was small, barely big enough for a desk and the rotted remains of a chair. One wall had a half-collapsed ladder leading up to a broken hatch. The smell was of wet timber and rust. I told myself that whatever I'd heard, whatever had followed me, had been left outside. I picked up the torch and shone it across the floor. Damp prints marked where I'd stepped, darkening the wood. I counted 3, 4, 5, then one more that wasn't mine. I stared until my eyes watered. The extra footprint was reversed toes pointing toward me. The wind moaned through the gaps in the planks, and something shifted overhead. Dust fell. I held the light to the ladder. The hatch above hung open, swaying gently. I could have sworn it had been closed when I entered. I called out, "Hello?" The sound felt foolish, too loud for such a small space. "Hello?" The echo came instantly, from directly behind my shoulder. I turned nothing, just the wall. My throat tightened. I backed into the corner, forcing slow breaths, counting to keep from shaking. Its echo, I told myself. Wood and wind. That's all. It's dark. The tower creaked as though laughing at the lie. I tried to steady my nerves by talking anything to hear a human voice. I described the grain of the boards, the smell of damp. It was nonsense, but it filled the air. For a moment it worked, until, between one sentence and the next, my words didn't end where I left them. They continued. "The smell of damp," said the other voice, mine, but not mine, carrying on a heartbeat later, perfect in tone, wrong in rhythm. I bit my tongue. The copy stopped too. Silence again. I whispered, "Why are you doing this? The Resili Roomlander. Why are you doing this?" It breathed back. This time the voice was inside the room, low and close, like someone leaning near my ear in the dark. I swung the torch wildly. The beam caught dust. Then something else, my reflection in the broken glass of the window. For a split second, the reflection didn't move with me. It smiled when I didn't. The light flickered and died. I dropped to my knees, fumbling for the spare batteries. In the dark, a faint breathing began slow, deliberate, matching mine exactly. I held my breath. It held its. When I exhaled, so did it. And then it whispered, perfectly calm, "You can't leave me again. That is rate to party." The ladder above groaned as if someone heavier than air was descending it, step by step. The boards beneath me answered, shifting with every breath that wasn't mine. I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding, until my own voice, impossibly clear, spoke from the dark. "You left me in the ground, as a said for I bolted for the door, tearing it open. Outside, the fog had thinned, silver under the moon. The forest was quiet, too quiet. When I looked back, the tower stood empty, silent. I laughed, half sobbing. Maybe it was done. Maybe the echo had finally spent itself. The night air felt almost kind against my skin. I started down the hill toward the trail. My breathing slowed. Each step sounded normal again. Until, halfway through the clearing, I realized I could still hear footsteps. Not behind me this time. Right beside me, perfectly in sync. At first, I thought the rhythm of those steps was only in my head. Every time I slowed, the sound beside me slowed too. When I stopped, it stopped. The silence pressed close, thick as wool, until I forced myself to breathe again. The instant my lungs filled, another breath answered, drawn through unseen lungs right next to my ear. I turned sharply, no one, only the mist, folding over itself like grey silk. "Stop following me," I shouted. The fog absorbed the words, and then half a second later released them back. "Stop following me. There is raid." My own voice begged from somewhere behind. I ran. Branches lashed at my face. Water splashed up from puddles. The forest seemed to change shape around me. Trees I didn't remember leaned closer. Roots snagged at my boots. I didn't know if I was heading downhill or in circles. The footsteps multiplied 2, 3, 4 sets, closing in until the air itself pulsed with the rhythm. My pulse became another footstep in the chorus. I stumbled into the old stream bed, half dry now, its stones slick with moss. I followed it downhill, hoping it would lead me out. The water whispered along the edges, repeating the same word over and over, home, home, home. Then I saw the light, a pale shimmer between the trunks, flickering like a lantern. I forced my legs toward it, desperate for anything human. The closer I came, the colder the air grew, and the light resolved into a shape standing in the fog. It was me. Not a reflection, solid, breathing, face blank except for the eyes. It lifted its hand, palm open, a gesture I recognized because I'd done it myself when calling to the forest hours ago. "Stay back," I whispered. It smiled, my own smile, crooked and tired. "Stay back," it whispered. Then, in perfect unison, we both said, "Please." Ready eyes seemed to. The air snapped. The world echoed itself, sound collapsing inward. Every tree, every leaf, every drop of water began to hum the same note. My voice stretched across them all. I clamped my hands over my ears and ran again, through the double world of sound and silence. Behind me came the rush of movement, dozens of versions of my voice crying out, some pleading, some laughing. The fog glowed faintly with each echo, shapes forming and unforming like breath on glass. I reached a fallen pine, climbed over it, and nearly fell into a hollow pit. Inside the pit lay bones animal, maybe human, too eroded to tell, wrapped in tatters of cloth. My light caught on something small, a camera, older than mine, half buried in the mud. The lens was shattered, but its red indicator blinked once as I touched it. A voice hissed through the static speaker. Not mine this time. "You found me, the prizey." The fog surged downward into the pit, spiraling like smoke being inhaled. The air turned sharp, metallic. Something in the bones shifted, and a figure began to rise, limbs unfolding with the sound of tearing roots. I scrambled backward, slipping on wet stone. The figure was taller now, its skin the same pale grey as the fog, its face a half-formed version of mine, features still arranging themselves. When it opened its mouth, every sound I had made since entering the forest spilled out laughter, breath, pleading all at once. I ran again, the path vanishing under my feet, the forest twisting into itself. The thing followed easily, no longer walking but gliding, the sound of its steps everywhere and nowhere. "Why me?" I gasped. The answer came from the trees, from the stream, from the echo of my own throat. "Because you called me," the sign lately. Ahead, a faint orange glow campfire, sunrise, anything that wasn't this. I sprinted toward it, lungs burning, the echo screaming my name from every direction. Branches clawed at my coat, my camera strap snapped. The light grew brighter, then exploded into clarity the road. I stumbled out of the tree line, collapsing onto gravel. The world went still, no echo, no voice, only the sound of blood in my ears and the thin whine of wind through the wires above. I looked back. The forest stood quiet, fog thinning, innocent once more. Nothing moved between the trunks. I told myself to keep walking, not to look again, but curiosity is a cruel thing. I turned one last time and saw, far back among the trees, a shape standing exactly where I had emerged. It raised a hand, palm open, my hand. Then it lowered it slowly and stepped backward into the mist, leaving the faintest whisper hanging in the cold air. "You'll come back." And secretly, the levelly likelies raise when. I didn't look back again, not until I'd reached the car. My hands shook so hard that I dropped the keys twice before the engine finally caught. The headlights cut through the last wisps of fog, and I drove until trees gave way to open fields. Only then did I begin to breathe normally again. The radio was on low, a soft, static hum. I kept it that way, needing the sound. Silence, I'd learned, was dangerous. By the time I reached town, dawn had thinned the night. I parked outside the first diner I found, hands still trembling, boots caked in mud. The waitress looked at me once and said nothing, just poured coffee. It tasted of burnt sugar, ordinary and safe. I almost cried from relief. I pulled out my phone to check the footage from my camera, hoping for proof of what I'd seen. The screen stayed black for a moment, then flickered. My own face stared back pale, eyes wide, filmed from a distance. In the background, fog drifted. I hadn't been holding the camera when that was recorded. A chill went through me. I turned off the phone and left cash on the counter. When I stepped outside, the air was bright and clean. For the first time in days, there was birdsong. I opened the car door, stopped. From somewhere in the woods beyond the town's edge came a soft echo, faint but clear, my own voice calling, "Hello?" The Storyteller Dali was looting to grained. It rolled over the fields, stretched by distance, exactly the way it had sounded that first evening by the stream. Then, a reply, low, drawn out, and close enough to mist my ear. Hello? Consteely, with a no my crested to stay tamed. The sound came from the back seat. I turned slowly. The seat was empty, but the window beside it was fogged from inside. A single word traced into the condensation. Home. The whisper that followed was quiet, almost kind. You brought me back. This is with a phonely sea dade in feigned. The keys slipped from my hand. The first night the fog came in from the sea. It never went back. By morning, the village was an island made of mist. The boats in the harbour vanished in silence. Their ropes hung slack, trailing into nothing. Even the gulls stopped crying, as though the sky had forgotten to breathe. I had come to this place to record silence fieldwork on acoustic decay in isolated environments. But the fog wasn't silence, it sang. It started as a vibration underfoot, a deep hum rising from the water's edge. At first I thought it was the wind moving through the cliffs, or some far-off engine. But as the hours passed, the sound gathered shape notes curling around each other like smoke, low voices forming a choir without words. By dusk, the entire coast was humming. When I asked an old fisherman what it was, he only shook his head. The sea's remembering, he said. Don't answer when it calls. AD 2, AD 2. That night, I stood by the shore with my recorder. The fog pressed against my skin, warm as breath, and from somewhere inside it, the choir began again soft, endless, calling names that sounded too much like my own. By the second day, the fog had thickened enough to turn every sound into a memory. The church bell rang at noon, but its echo stretched wrong too long, as though something in the mist kept ringing after the metal stopped. I played back my recordings from the night before. What I'd expected to be white noise was patterned, structured. Beneath the steady ocean hiss, there were tones low, harmonic, perfectly spaced, a choir without breath. I slowed the playback, filtered the wind frequencies, and realized the notes were changing pitch every few seconds, almost speaking. My rational mind tried to catalogue it. Resonance phenomena, overlapping echoes, atmospheric distortion. Yet each time I pressed play, I heard new shapes in the sound, syllables hidden in the hum. By dusk, the villagers had shuttered their windows. The harbour lights flickered through the fog like eyes blinking. I knocked on one of the cottage doors, hoping for conversation, but the woman inside only murmured through the wood, "We don't talk after sundown." The reason? Her voice trembled, and behind her words I thought I heard the faint continuation of that same hum, softer, closer. That evening, I set up my recorder at the cliff's edge. The sea below was invisible, but the fog glowed faintly, as if lit from within. The choir began again, rising from the water, more distinct now. I could pick out at least 6 voices, each taking turns, weaving names through the vapor. At first, the names meant nothing. Elliot, Rose, Martin. But then I heard Tom, the name of the fisherman who had spoken to me the day before. I stopped the recorder and turned toward the village. Somewhere far inland, a single dog barked once, then was cut off mid-breath. I replayed the last 10 seconds of the tape. The voices had changed. They no longer called the names. They sang them drawn out in mournful tones, dissolving into one another. My name came last. I froze. The sound was faint but unmistakable, pulled through the fog like a sigh. Adam, when Nassagening broth to round to. The fog seemed to lean closer as I stood there. My own breath fogged the air, joining the haze, and for a heartbeat, I thought I could see figures shifting in it, faces forming and fading, mouths open in silent chorus. I told myself it was pareidolia, tricks of light and sound, but when I blinked, One of the faces didn't fade with the rest. It stayed, watching. And when the next wave of fog rolled over the cliff, it whispered not my name this time, but come closer. That night, the fog swallowed the village whole. The street lamps vanished first, their halos fading one by one until nothing but a grey pulse remained. Every sound, the creak of timber, the flap of a window shutter seemed to come from underwater. I sat by the window of the inn, recorder on, headphones clamped tight, waiting for the choir to return. It didn't make me wait long. At first, only the low hum again, a vibration that trembled in my teeth. Then, slowly, a second layer joined a higher voice, fragile as glass, humming the same note but a half-tone sharp. The interference made the air itself quiver. I turned up the volume. Beneath the harmony I heard something impossible. Breaths, short, human, as if the singers were standing just outside my door. I ripped off the headphones. The sound didn't stop. It was in the room. The walls thrummed. The bed frame pulsed against the floorboards in rhythm with the unseen choir. I stumbled to the door, flung it open, and the song poured through the hallway like fog made of sound, pressing against my skin. I could almost feel the notes moving through me, vibrating in my bones. "Stop," I whispered, not sure to whom. The moment I spoke, the choir shifted key, the melody bending to include the pitch of my voice. It answered. Each phrase that left my mouth was echoed and absorbed, repeated by 100 unseen throats until the room itself was speaking with me. I slammed the door, but the sound didn't fade. The walls were breathing, swelling in and out, as though the whole building had lungs. Outside, the fog pressed hard against the glass, glowing faintly. Within it, I saw movement, outlines of people walking, heads tilted toward the sky, mouths open in silent song. They drifted through the streets in pairs, then in groups, then hundreds, their shapes merging until they were one moving, luminous mass. The old clock downstairs began to strike midnight, but the sound was swallowed by the harmony. The fog rose higher, sliding under the door in ribbons. I could smell salt and metal, like blood in seawater. My recorder, still running, picked up the frequencies automatically, its red light flashing faster, as though matching the tempo of the chant. Then, for the first time, the voices formed words I could understand. "One more, one more, one more," we said sensibly. My heart stumbled in my chest. I pressed myself against the window, trying to see through the shifting light. Down by the harbour, something glowed, pale shapes gathering at the water's edge. For a moment, I thought they were lanterns. Then one turned, and I saw a face white, eyes closed, lips moving with the rhythm. The sea below churned, not from tide, but from motion within. The fog pulsed in time with it, as if the entire coast were breathing the same long, steady breath. When the choir hit its final note, every light in the village died. My reflection in the window lingered a moment longer than it should have, still singing, mouth wide. Then it, too, faded into the mist. I could no longer tell where the fog ended and the air began. Each breath was heavy, salted, as though the sea had found its way inside my lungs. The windows trembled with the vibration of unseen throats. Every wall, every nail, sang in harmony with something vast just beyond sight. I forced open the door to the street. The fog spilled in around my legs, warm and slow, curling like living smoke. The village had vanished under a shroud of lightless grey. The lamps were gone, the church spire a smudge of darkness above me. The sound was everywhere now, not coming from the fog, but through it, as if the mist itself had become an instrument. It was beautiful, terrible, but beautiful. I tried to record. The mic hissed with static, but beneath it, the choir rolled and folded, an endless breath woven of hundreds of voices. As I stood there, I began to pick out familiar tones, the fisherman's deep rasp, the high tremor of the woman from the cottage, the clear ring of the bell that had called noon. They weren't gone. They'd joined the song. The realization struck cold through my chest. I turned back toward the inn, but the door was gone. The building had dissolved into a grey outline. Then the choir stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, thick, expectant. I whispered my own name, just to hear something human. The fog whispered it back, perfectly timed. Adam. We lattied. Rain Denelli. The voice wasn't echo. It was imitation, intimate and deliberate. Shapes emerged from the mist, figures of light and shadow, their forms barely human. Their mouths moved in time with one another, open but soundless. Then one of them turned toward me and sang the first note. It wasn't a sound I could describe. It felt rather than heard, a deep vibration running through the ground into my bones. The others joined, and the air shook. My legs gave out. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but the song came from inside me now. Each voice pressed against my thoughts, sifting through them like fingers through sand. Images spilled across my mind, cliffs, waves, a void beneath the sea where light didn't reach. Something enormous stirred down there, ancient and patient, breathing through 1,000 borrowed throats. The figures moved closer, their features flickering between the faces of everyone I'd met in the village, all singing with the same mouth. Their voices merged into one tone that formed a word I understood without translation. Join. Numberly. I staggered backward, shaking my head. No, I whispered. I'm not one of you. The Dentia. One more. The fog answered. The ground beneath me rippled. The mist thickened until I couldn't see my own hands. The sound became unbearable, a perfect note that pierced through air, through skin, through thought. I clutched my ears, screamed, and felt the vibration crawl through my bones like heat. Then, suddenly, silence again. The fog cleared just enough to show the harbour below the sea glowing faintly, as though a light pulsed beneath its surface. Every shape in the mist turned toward it, kneeling. I ran. My legs moved without command, carrying me toward the cliff path, the song still echoing behind. The ground shook once, a long, deep pulse. The air smelled of salt and rust. The fog around me brightened, and when I looked down at my hands, the skin seemed translucent, veins glowing faintly as if catching the same inner light. I tripped, hit the ground, and crawled the rest of the way up the slope. Behind me, the choir rose again, a single impossible harmony that filled the entire coast. At the top of the hill, I turned back once. The sea was no longer water. It was breathing, heaving in and out, glowing with each exhale, and from that light, thousands of pale figures rose, singing without mouths. Their voices followed me into the dark. By morning, the fog had retreated to the shoreline. From the ridge above the village, I could see the faint outline of roofs and the grey smear of the harbour. It looked harmless in daylight, fragile even as though nothing had happened at all. I told myself I'd imagined the night, sleep deprivation, acoustic illusions, sea hallucinations. It was the only way to stop the trembling in my hands. The wind on the hill was thin and clean, a sound I recognized, the first honest silence in days. I started walking toward the next town. The path cut through open fields. No fog followed. The further I went, the more I believed I'd escaped. But around noon, I noticed the hum again, faint, almost under my heartbeat, a resonance in the air, like the memory of a note. I stopped. The sound stopped. I took another step. The hum returned. It wasn't around me. It was in me. I pressed a hand to my chest. My ribs vibrated softly. The rhythm subtle but deliberate. I held my breath and the hum continued. Panic tightened my throat. I tore the recorder from my bag, switched it on. The display flickered. The battery shouldn't have had charge left. I hit playback. From the tiny speaker came the same harmony I'd heard by the sea, only now each voice was mine. Hundreds of layers, whispering, murmuring, humming. My laugh, my breath, my heartbeat twisted into melody. I threw the recorder into the grass, but the sound didn't stop. It came from inside my skull, a vibration behind the eyes, behind thought itself. When I covered my ears, the music grew louder. I began to run, downhill, through heather and gorse, until my legs gave way. The earth seemed to pulse beneath my palms. Every gust of wind carried faint tones that shaped my name, the syllables drawn out like part of the song. When I finally reached a small farmhouse by the road, I banged on the door. An old man answered, blinking at me with the calm indifference of someone used to strangers. "You're from the coast," he said quietly. I nodded, trying to catch breath. "How did you know?" "Won the binks. I had bride and fire." He tilted his head, listening. "Because you're humming. They works phrasey op say." I didn't realize it until he said it. My lips moved unconsciously, forming the melody under my breath. I clamped my mouth shut. The sound didn't stop. He stepped back, fear flickering across his face. "You need to leave before dusk. They'll call again. I hope lad ones." "Who?" I managed. But he only closed the door. Through the wood, I heard him whisper a prayer or perhaps a verse of the same song. I staggered to the road, shaking. The hum had grown steadier now, almost comforting. Each time I exhaled, the air left my throat in tune, a single perfect note that shimmered into the open air. I tried not to listen, but there's a moment between heartbeats where silence hides, and in that gap, I can hear them. The choir hasn't stopped. It just moved inside. When I looked toward the horizon, the sea was invisible behind a curtain of mist, but I could feel its rhythm in my pulse. The fog was breathing again, through me. By the time dusk bled into the fields, I could no longer tell which sounds were mine. Every breath I took carried harmony. Every heartbeat added rhythm. The fog was still far off, hovering above the coast, but I could feel its pull like a tide beneath my skin. The air around me trembled faintly, a vibration too deep for ears, too close for comfort. I needed silence. Real silence. I stumbled into a derelict barn beside the road. The doors hung loose, the interior dim and dry. Dust swirled in the last orange light. I crouched behind a pile of hay and pressed my palms over my mouth, forcing myself not to hum. For one blessed second, there was nothing. Then, faintly, the beams began to vibrate. The walls joined in, humming in the same key as my pulse. "Stop," I whispered, and the air whispered back. "Stop," delayed by a heartbeat. It wasn't coming from outside. It was me. I pulled out my field recorder, the same device I'd thrown hours ago, and stared at it. The screen flickered, the red light already blinking. Though I hadn't touched the button, the display read, "Playing." Through the tiny speaker came a low, endless chord. It wasn't music anymore. It was the sound of something thinking. The tone thickened until it filled the entire barn, shaking straw loose from the rafters. I dropped the recorder and ran. Outside, the fog had returned. It rolled over the hedgerows like a tide, glowing faintly from within. And the choir, oh, the choir was louder than it had ever been, rising, splitting into octaves, calling in 100 languages at once. The sound crawled across the landscape, pulling at the wind, at the trees, at me. I ran down the road, the vibrations chasing under my feet. The song shifted key, aligning with the pace of my breath. The faster I ran, the higher it climbed, matching me perfectly, as though the world was tuning itself to my body. A voice my own sang from the fog ahead. You can't run from what's inside. D'Aid see, friend. I skidded to a stop. The fog thickened, swirling around me. Shapes moved within it, figures of light and salt, their mouths open in soundless vowels. Their faces were mine, all of them. The chorus reached a crescendo. The air rippled, colorless waves radiating from a point deep within the mist. I covered my ears, but the song was inside my bones now, shaking me from the inside out. My knees hit the ground. Please? I gasped. Let me go. I'll see. The voices paused, perfectly together. Then one spoke low, kind, endless. We never wanted to keep you. We wanted you to remember. Setli prositang. The fog pressed closer. I could taste salt on my tongue. Behind my eyes, images bloomed. The sea, dark and bottomless. A light beating beneath it like a heart. Thousands of shapes floating, mouths open, waiting for breath. You are the echo, they sang, the missing voice. Altar about. I felt it then the moment the harmony locked into me. The vibration inside my chest deepened, aligned, became whole. The fear melted into something else. Awe, acceptance, the dizzying sense of belonging. The sound that left my mouth was no longer a word, not even a scream. It was a note, perfect and endless. The fog shuddered in response, and for the first time, the song faltered. The light within it flickered. The harmony needed me, but I could feel the choice to keep singing or to stop and break the pattern. With the last thread of strength, I inhaled and stayed silent. The world cracked. The fog recoiled as if struck, ripping itself apart into ribbons of light. The sound shattered into static, then nothing. The figures of mist blew away like ash. I fell forward, gasping, the silence deafening after so much noise. The sea below was calm again, black and endless, its surface smooth as glass. Somewhere far off, a gull screamed a real sound, sharp and ugly and alive. I laughed, half sobbing, half free. But when I looked down at my hands, they were trembling not with fear, but vibration, faint, steady, rhythmic. My breath still carried a pitch, soft but undeniable. The fog was gone, but the song wasn't. It had just moved deeper. Silence never lasts. It just hides, waiting for breath to return. 3 days after the fog broke, I reached the next town. The people there spoke in normal voices. Their laughter hurt my ears. No one had heard the choir, or the hum, or the sea that breathed. They said the coast was calm. I told them my equipment had been lost, that I was done with sound. They smiled politely, not understanding the relief I tried to fake. That night I booked a room above the pub. A radio played somewhere below ordinary static between songs, blessed in its imperfection. I sat on the bed and watched the world through the window, waiting for the quiet to feel safe again. It almost did, until I realized the radio wasn't tuned to any station. The bartender had switched it off an hour ago. The static still whispered faintly through the floorboards, a single low note humming in time with my heartbeat. I held my breath. The note kept going. Then, from the glass of water on the bedside table, ripples began to spread, tiny circles pulsing outward as if someone were singing beneath it. A second tone joined, higher, familiar, my own. The air in the room thickened. The light bulb flickered once, twice, then steadied. The silence between those flickers wasn't empty, it was waiting, listening. I pressed my hands over my ears, but deep in the skull's hollow I could still hear the rhythm start again. 3 low beats. 1 pause. 3 more. The same pattern that had called from the sea. I whispered, "No? Das ist to begin, 2 Rs Braze Speed." The sound around me harmonized instantly, turning my refusal into the next note of the chord. The room trembled softly, the glass cracked, and from the thin fracture in its side, the faintest mist began to rise, curling like smoke. The song never ends. My voice murmured from nowhere and everywhere at once. The water stilled. My reflection in it smiled when I didn't. Then the humming deepened warm, familiar, infinite, and the walls began to breathe. I never meant to paint her face again. But some faces refused to stay buried. The studio was small and windowless, just brick, dust, and the smell of old turpentine. I'd rented it after the funeral, telling myself that work might quiet the noise inside my head. It didn't. The silence there had a pulse of its own, a slow, measured rhythm that waited for my brush to move. She had been gone 6 months when I began sketching the outline thin charcoal lines across canvas. Just practice, I said, yet every stroke landed exactly where it had before. Every shadow fell in the same curve as her cheek, her eyes, her lips. By nightfall, the portrait was almost complete. I stood back, trembling. The air in the room had grown still, thick with the smell of oil and varnish. The candles along the wall guttered once, their flames bending toward the canvas. And then I heard it. A breath, quiet, deliberate, drawn from somewhere behind the painting. I froze, brush still dripping black. Another breath followed, this one softer, almost sighing. It came again, timed with my heartbeat. The painting, I realized, was breathing. By morning, the smell of linseed and damp varnish had thickened. The portrait stood exactly where I'd left it on the easel, half turned toward the windowless wall. I hadn't slept. I told myself that what I'd heard had been breath from my own lungs echoing in the hollow room. Still, I approached it carefully, brush in hand like a talisman. The face I'd painted seemed ordinary now, fixed in that soft half-smile I remembered too well. Yet the light was wrong. I leaned closer. The shadows beneath the eyes were deeper than I'd painted them. The pupils looked wider, as if adjusted to darkness. The surface of the oil was perfectly dry. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. "Fatigue," I muttered. "That's all. The scaring peek into ride." I opened the door to let light in, but the corridor outside was unlit. The landlord had disconnected the bulbs again. Only the faintest glow filtered from the stairwell, and when I returned to the easel, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. I forced myself to keep working. Each stroke of the brush landed with a sound, a soft, wet sigh against the canvas. I thought it was my imagination until I noticed that the rhythm didn't match my movements. Between one stroke and the next, a second sound answered, lower, slower, like breath drawn through paint. I stopped. The room went silent except for that small, steady respiration. It came from behind the canvas again. "Enough," I whispered. The breathing ceased. I laughed too loudly, the sound brittle. The echo that came back didn't sound like mine. To calm myself, I stepped outside for air. The stairwell smelled of plaster and dust. Familiar, comforting. But when I looked back through the half-open door, I saw something that froze me in place. The flame of the candle nearest the painting bent forward, as though drawn toward it, stretching out in a thin, trembling line until it nearly touched the canvas. Then it straightened again. When I re-entered the room, the portrait seemed unchanged. I convinced myself the flame had flickered by chance. I sat in front of the easel for an hour, forcing my eyes to stay open, daring it to move. It didn't. Only when I turned to leave did I notice a new detail I hadn't painted. A faint smudge of grey beneath the figure's chin, not brushstroke, but shadow, shaped exactly like the curve of a throat taking in breath. And the next moment, I could swear the canvas exhaled. That night, I stayed in the studio with every candle burning. The shadows that gathered in the corners looked like stains rather than darkness. I tried painting another canvas, anything to pull my eyes away from her, but no matter what I sketched, my hand kept returning to the same shape of a face I knew too well. The first sound came just after midnight. A faint scrape, as though the wooden frame had shifted against the wall. Then another, quieter, like cloth moving over skin. I told myself it was the building settling, a draft through the cracks. But the studio had no window, and the air was still. When I finally turned toward the portrait, it looked different. The mouth was open just slightly, as though caught in the act of speaking. I leaned close, too close, and the faintest breath brushed my cheek. I stumbled back, knocking over a jar of solvent. The liquid spread across the floor, sharp and cold, and the brush handles rattled against the jar as if stirred by an unseen hand. The sound that followed was not a breath this time, but a laugh. Not loud, soft, broken, the kind you make through tears. I froze, staring at the portrait. Her painted lips had returned to stillness, but something new glistened at the edge of one eye, a faint shimmer, wet and catching the light like a tear. I backed away until I felt the wall. "You're not real," I said aloud, voice trembling. The portrait seemed to listen. The laugh came again, closer now, more deliberate. The candles along the shelf bent toward the canvas, their flames shivering with each exhale. Then the frame began to tremble. The nails that pinned it to the easel creaked softly, as though the wood beneath was straining to move. I forced my eyes away if I didn't look. It couldn't change. I stared at the floor, at the spill of turpentine creeping across the boards, at the small trembling of my own hands. The room went quiet again. When I looked up, the portrait's eyes were no longer fixed on me. They had shifted just slightly to the left, toward the door. I blinked, certain it was imagination, but as I moved, the pupils followed, lagging behind by a breath before catching up. The mouth curved. "You're tired," I whispered. "You're hearing things." Careful way, but the echo that came back wasn't my voice. It was hers, low, slow, drawn from the paint itself. "You're tired," it breathed. The sound wrapped around me like warmth and cold at once. The candles sputtered and went out one by one until only the portrait glowed faintly in the dark, the oil seeming to catch a light of its own. The last thing I heard before I fled the room was the gentle stretching of canvas, like lungs expanding after too long underwater. And beneath that, faint but certain, came the rhythm of a heartbeat. Not mine. I didn't sleep. The night air followed me home, thick with the scent of paint and turpentine. Every sound in my flat, the ticking clock, the pipes, even my own breath carried the same slow rhythm that had pulsed from the canvas. I sat in the dark, hands pressed to my ears, trying not to remember the sound of that heartbeat. At dawn, I decided to end it. The streets were empty as I walked back to the studio. My key trembled in the lock. Inside, the air was stale, colder than it should have been. Every candle had burned down to stubs. Their wax hardened into pale rivers across the floorboards. The portrait stood exactly as I'd left it, still and quiet. But something about the face was wrong again. The smile was gone. The eyes, those eyes were half closed, heavy-lidded, as though caught in sleep. I stepped closer and saw condensation on the inside of the glass protecting the frame. Tiny drops, perfectly round. Breath. I lifted my palette knife, meaning to slash through the canvas once and for all. "You shouldn't exist," I whispered. "You're not real." "Right." They would do this too. The moment the metal touched the surface, the portrait's eyelids snapped open. I stumbled backward, the knife clattering to the floor. The painted pupils rolled to follow me. For the first time, I saw them blink. Not a trick of light, an actual movement, wet and slow, like oil turning to flesh. The heartbeat returned, louder now, shaking the jars on the shelf. The brush handles trembled in their pots, the sound like teeth chattering. I grabbed the nearest rag and threw it over the portrait. The fabric stuck where it met the paint, clinging as though to skin. I heard a hiss wet, sharp, and the rag began to darken, soaking through with color. I tore it away. The paint beneath had smeared into bruised streaks, and yet the face beneath them grimaced, as if in pain. I backed toward the door, every instinct screaming to leave, but the voice stopped me. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a gasp, shaky, human. "Don't," it said. The lips on the canvas moved with the word. I froze. "Please," it breathed again. "Not again?" "Hey, in the trilly and tell for..." I could smell salt, faint and sweet, like tears. The eyes blinked once more, the expression twisting into something that looked like fear. My throat closed. "What are you?" "That telly and decide in sen self." The answer came in my own voice. "You made me." "Way." The room spun. I tried to reach the windowless wall for balance, but my hand brushed a jar of thinner instead, spilling it across the floor. The fumes filled the air, sharp and chemical. The portrait's expression shifted again, grief, anger, hunger, its mouth opening wider until the sound inside was no longer speech, but breathing, deep and rhythmic. Every candle stub on the floor reignited at once, flames bending inward toward the painting. Shadows leapt across the walls like figures trying to escape. I snatched up the palette knife again and drove it straight through the heart of the portrait. The studio roared. A rush of air, a cry that was half wind and half human, filled the room. The canvas bulged around the knife, pulsing once, twice, as though the metal had pierced something alive. Then, suddenly, everything went still. The heartbeat stopped. Smoke curled from the puncture in the painting. I backed away, chest heaving, tears stinging my eyes from the fumes. For a long minute, nothing moved. Then the knife handle began to turn slowly, dragged from the other side. The blade slid free, clattering to the floor. The hole it left closed, paint knitting itself together like skin healing over a wound. The face inside the frame smiled again, serene, forgiving, and from behind the glass came a single, trembling breath drawn in, then released in a whisper. "Now it's your turn." It's an to power to word to find, fall and see. When the breathing finally stopped, the silence rang in my ears like applause. The portrait hung motionless again, the colors still bleeding slightly from the knife wound. I didn't look at it for long. I didn't want to see it heal any further. I told myself it was over, that whatever trick of grief or madness had birthed the voice was gone now. I packed my brushes, my paints, even the rags that stank of turpentine. The air in the studio was sharp, metallic. I locked the door, left the key on the table, and promised myself I would never return. Outside, dawn had begun to unspool across the street, a pale, indifferent light. The world smelled of rain and stone, clean and ordinary. My legs carried me home as though they'd been waiting to escape. For the first time in months, I slept. When I woke, the room was dark again. A storm had rolled in, wind thrumming against the windows. I sat up, confused by the weight in my chest, that dull, familiar rhythm I'd almost forgotten. I tried to tell myself it was only my heartbeat, but it didn't match. The sound came from somewhere else. A slow inhale, a slower exhale. I followed it through the flat, each step stirring faint dust in the light of the street lamp outside. The sound grew clearer near the walls, a deep, soft respiration that seemed to seep through plaster. When I pressed my ear to the paintwork, it was warm. I tore away one of the sheets covering my spare easel. Nothing there, just blank canvas, untouched. But as I stared, a patch of colour bloomed faintly in the centre, a bruise of shadow, then another. The outline of a face began to take shape, drawn in the same hand, my hand, though I hadn't touched a brush. The breath came again, this time from inside the canvas itself. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, I left you there. The resin. The wind outside swelled, and with it came the faint smell of linseed oil, sweet, rotten. The lamp flickered. The surface of the blank canvas rippled as though something beneath it was exhaling. My reflection in the varnish twisted, eyes black, mouth slightly open. Then, from the silence, a voice. I said it was your turn, but to. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They came from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the breath between seconds. The air thickened with humidity. Condensation gathered on the mirror above the mantel, forming thin trails that curved like brushstrokes. My name appeared there, faint but legible, as if written by a finger dipped in turpentine. I stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. The bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. And in that darkness, the breathing continued louder now, echoing in rhythm with my own. I felt it behind me, around me, inside the walls. I covered my mouth to stifle a sob. The breath beneath my palms wasn't mine. I ran to the door, fumbled with the lock, but the metal had softened, sticky with some slick film. From behind me, the sound of stretching canvas, long, slow, deliberate. I turned just in time to see the blank painting on the easel pulse outward, its surface swelling like a lung. The faint image of a figure stood within it, not her this time, but me. Its painted chest rose and fell. I screamed and grabbed the frame, meaning to tear it apart, but the wood was soft, warm, living. The portrait's mouth opened, mirroring mine. For a heartbeat, it looked like a reflection caught mid-screen. Then it inhaled. The air in the room collapsed toward it, a violent, sudden suction that dragged dust, light, and sound into the painting. My lungs seized. The air was gone. The last thing I heard before everything went black was a voice, calm, close, and terribly familiar. Now, breathe. The 7:40s in Cap today, I woke in darkness. Not the darkness of a room, but of something deeper, dense, muffled, and thick with the smell of turpentine. When I tried to move, my limbs met resistance. as if I were trapped under water that didn't flow. My hands brushed against a smooth surface, cold, slick, unyielding. The air, if it could be called air, clung to me. My breath came slow and shallow, every inhale dragging against invisible weight. Somewhere, faint and far, I heard the rhythmic creak of an easel and the whisper of a brush across canvas. Then the voice. Breathe with me. We have cases being not to side paths. Her voice, the voice I'd painted, the one I had tried to silence. I reached out in the dark, my fingers finding texture grain, wood. I was inside something. The surface around me pulsed faintly, as if alive. I struck it, once, twice, hearing dull thuds echo outward, but the sound came back wrong, flattened, painted. I shouted. The noise didn't fill the space. It folded in on itself. For every word I yelled, another voice whispered it back, perfectly timed but from the wrong direction behind my own teeth, inside my skull. I clawed at the surface until my nails tore. Beneath my palms, something gave a thin crack of light, the color of candle flame, opened ahead of me. I pushed toward it, lungs screaming for air. When I broke through, the world split. I was back in the studio, the same room, the same stench of oil and smoke, but the air shimmered faintly, warped like heat over asphalt. My body felt heavy, skin stretched too tight. The painting stood before me, upright on the easel. Only now, it wasn't her. It was me. The face on the canvas blinked once, then smiled my own mouth. Calm and knowing, I stepped closer, every movement sluggish, as though time had grown viscous. The reflection in the glass moved slightly slower than I did, its head tilting to follow my approach. "Let me out," I croaked. "You are out," it said gently. I reached for the frame. The glass was warm. Beneath my touch, the painted version of me inhaled, chest rising in rhythm with mine. When I stepped back, it exhaled. "We breathe together now," it whispered. The studio's walls began to warp, bending inward as if made of cloth. Paintings I hadn't finished fluttered on their hooks, the colors seeping across the floor like spilled blood. The heartbeat that had haunted me from the first night returned, deep and steady, syncing with my own. "No," I stumbled toward the door, but the handle melted beneath my grip, dripping like wax. Behind me, the portrait spoke again, still using my voice. "You made me from yourself. You gave me breath. It's only fair I give you rest. Righty kotu." I turned back, trembling. "I don't want your rest." "Righteen." The smile widened. "Then take mine. I'll for longer." The canvas rippled, its surface opening like a lung drawing air. Wind rushed through the room, though there was no window, pulling me closer. My feet slid across the boards. I fought, clinging to the desk, but the suction grew stronger, not a pull of air, but of recognition. The last candle flared and went out. In the darkness, something cold brushed my wrist fingers, paint slick and shaking. They wrapped around my arm and pulled. I screamed and felt my skin stretch, my voice torn apart by the rush of air. The world folded. The smell of oil overwhelmed everything. When light returned, I was standing before the easel. The studio was quiet, empty. My brushes lay neatly arranged. The air didn't move. On the canvas, she was there again, the woman I had painted first, her expression calm, peaceful, complete. Only now, the eyes were mine. The chest in the portrait rose once, slow and deep. And when I looked down at my own hands, they were no longer flesh. The color had dried into them: ochre, umber, crimson. Veins of cracking paint spread from fingertip to wrist. I tried to speak, but the air stuck. No sound came. The walls sighed, the same soft breath I'd heard that first night. From somewhere behind the canvas, her voice spoke again, quiet, patient, endless. Your turn to rest, my turn to breathe. The louse of the prizes come a pay. The room filled with the faint sound of canvas stretching. My lungs moved once more, not by will, but by rhythm. And with each inhale, the paint around me deepened, sealing the cracks. It was weeks before anyone noticed the smell. The landlord assumed it was another forgotten jar of solvent leaking through the floorboards. When he unlocked the studio, the air was thick and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. The room looked untouched, brushes lined neatly, canvases stacked, everything in its place. Only one painting stood on the easel, draped beneath a dust sheet. He hesitated, then pulled the cloth away. The portrait took his breath. It showed a man standing before an easel, palette knife in hand, caught between strokes. The detail was astonishing: the veins in the hand, the faint sheen of sweat on the brow, even the reflection of candles in the eyes. But what unsettled him most was how alive the colors looked. Wet, almost pulsing, as if the oil had never dried. He swore the chest in the portrait rose and fell, just slightly, before the light shifted. A trick of the mind, he told himself. He reached forward, meaning to touch the paint. Warm, not the sticky warmth of fresh varnish body warmth. He stumbled back. Behind the glass, the painted figure's eyes followed him. The mouth curved into the faintest smile. The landlord hurried to cover it again, muttering a prayer he barely remembered. But before he could step away, a sound escaped the frame, soft, steady, rhythmic. Breathing. He dropped the cloth, turned, and fled down the corridor. The door slammed behind him, echoing through the stairwell. Inside the studio, the portrait waited. The air barely moved, save for one small tremor through the canvas, the sound of someone drawing breath. And then, so faint it could have been imagined, a whisper seeped through the drying paint. Keep painting. The sweep, it started with static. A low hiss between radio stations, the kind of background noise that fills the silence when the world's asleep. I'd been scanning shortwave frequencies again, chasing phantom signals, habit more than hobby. Most nights, there's nothing, just that endless white ocean of sound. But at 12:17 a.m., the static folded. A voice slipped through. "Can you hear me? Old Diargi." It was soft, almost uncertain, like someone speaking from another room. I thought it was a pirate broadcast, maybe an echo from some forgotten frequency. But when I leaned closer, the voice repeated, quieter this time. "Don't turn it off." The Raprian's Joseph Fries. The air in the flat felt colder. I checked the signal strength, nothing. The dial glowed faint green, needle steady on a dead band. Then a rhythm began under the static. 3 short pulses, one long, over and over, almost like a heartbeat or code. I recorded it, thinking I could analyze it later. But as I hit playback, the recording played something I hadn't heard before: my own voice, whispering through the hiss. "You already did." There is bass and not to fading broglie. The receiver clicked by itself. The light stayed on. And the transmission kept going. I replayed the clip a dozen times before dawn. Each time, the same thing. My own voice whispering "you already did" through a sea of static. I tried every trick I knew, filtering frequencies, isolating bands, but no matter how I processed the file, the voice remained, stitched deep into the noise. The waveform showed no edit marks, no overlay. It was as if the radio itself had remembered me saying it. I convinced myself it was pareidolia, the brain finding patterns where none exist. I'd been awake too long, chasing phantom signals. Sleep would fix it, but I didn't sleep. The next night, I left the receiver tuned to that same dead frequency. At exactly 12:17 a.m., the hiss thickened again. A faint clicking rose from underneath, irregular but rhythmic, almost like keystrokes. Then, the voice returned. Listening, the bray tagged. I froze. Who is this? We left a brace with parted. Who is this? The trains to find. The voice copied me exactly pitch. Tone. Hesitation. My throat went dry. If this is some kind of recording. I turned off the radio. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of my computer tower. I laughed, shaky, trying to shake off the chill. I unplugged the receiver from the wall. Still, the speaker crackled once more. Don't. They won greens. The sound wasn't through the air anymore. It came from the metal casing itself, vibrating like a whisper through bone. I dropped the plug. The light on the dial blinked twice, then went out. I told myself it was feedback stored charge, mechanical echo, simple, logical. But when I opened my laptop to check the recording file, the player had already started on its own. The waveform pulsed across the screen like a heartbeat. No sound came through the speakers, yet the mic meter showed input. Something was listening back. I turned on my phone camera and pointed it at the receiver. The image flickered static. Again, but visible this time. Lines of light rolled across the screen like snow, and behind them, just for an instant, a shape. A face, half-formed, made of noise. Then it was gone. The monitor went black. My reflection in the dark glass stared back, pale and uncertain. And through the laptop speakers, barely audible, my own voice whispered once more, "Don't leave me in the dark. I've gains, with friend. To Myla." By the third night, the flat had begun to feel hollow, like the walls were waiting for something. I'd unplugged everything, router, speakers, even the refrigerator. Still, at 12:17 a.m., the static returned. No receiver this time, no cables, just the air itself, fizzing faintly as if the whole room had tuned in. The laptop screen glowed despite being shut. A faint waveform crept across it, repeating that familiar pulse, 3 short beats, 1 long. I opened the lid and froze. The recording program had started on its own. Input level. Live. Source unknown device. I whispered to no one. You shouldn't exist. They would sway to brog us the tenure a laughter Peters. From the laptop speakers, my voice answered, half a breath ahead of mine. You shouldn't exist. I, tooling 40s. The words weren't replayed. They were predicted. My echo was speaking before I did. I backed toward the wall. Stop it. A humming braze. Stop it. The singing. Please. There is not takers rectine seas while. Please. I have to be ground. The imitation faltered, then laughed, a hollow distortion that dissolved into white noise. The lights dimmed. Across the room, the unplugged radio clicked back to life, its dial glowing faintly green. Still listening. D252 South. The voice had changed. Not an imitation now, but a hybrid, half mine, half someone else's, woven together like overlapping frequencies. The pitch wavered between male and female. between whisper and scream, as if the signal were trying to settle on a shape. I grabbed my phone to record the moment. The screen lit up with a burst of static. Then a text notification appeared, though I'd switched to airplane mode hours ago. From unknown 12:17 a.m. You sound clearer tonight. The phone vibrated in my hand. Another message appeared, then another, flooding the screen. We hear you. We're coming through. Stay awake. Each line timed perfectly with the pulse of the static. I threw the phone onto the bed. The vibration continued even after it landed, rattling in short bursts. From somewhere near the bookshelf, my old television, unplugged for years, crackled alive. Lines of snow swept across the blank screen, resolving into a flicker of movement. I stepped closer. The picture was faint but unmistakable. It was my living room, right now. A figure stood where I was standing, back turned to the camera. Its head twitched slightly, as though catching another signal. The image flickered, and for a split second, the figure faced me. It had my face but blurred, distorted, the eyes black hollows filled with static. "You're late," the TV whispered. The sound echoed from every Surface phone, laptop, radio, all speaking in the same tone, overlapping in a chorus of electrical breath. Join the frequency. Wobrek 2. No more silence. In question. One voice. Dact. I stumbled to the fuse box, slammed the main switch down. Darkness swallowed everything. For 5 perfect seconds, there was peace. Then, from inside the dark, a low hum began again, subtle at first, then rising, vibrating through the floorboards. The unplugged devices lit one by one, their screens glowing in unison. Every speaker, every microphone, every circuit in the flat exhaled static. And underneath that ocean of noise, a heartbeat pulsed in time with mine. "Almost through," the voice whispered. I covered my ears. It didn't help. The sound was already inside. The lights were out, but the glow didn't die. Every screen in the flat shone faintly, pale green through the dark, as if they were breathing in rhythm. The sound of static pulsed between them, not random anymore, but ordered. It was building toward something. The television flickered, showing fragments of my living room from impossible angles. The laptop screen pulsed with my heartbeat. My phone camera switched on by itself, lens glowing red like an eye. The devices were no longer recording me, they were watching. "Almost through, the one fried," the voice whispered again, layered and close. The air thickened. Each word left condensation on the glass. I could see my own breath fogging the screen. "I'm done with this," I said, shaking. "Whoever's behind this, stop." "Atonement." The voice answered instantly, perfectly timed. "Stop. These see." Then again, slightly behind. "Whoever's behind this, there." And then, in perfect unison, "I'm done with this. Today lifey nows." Every device in the room repeated the same words at once, overlapping into a distorted choir. I yanked the plugs from the wall radio, TV, everything, but the glow didn't fade. I tore the battery from my phone, yet the screen still pulsed faintly, displaying my reflection. Only, it wasn't moving the same way I did. When I blinked, it didn't. When I turned my head, it lagged. When I froze, it smiled. Synchronization, 87%. "Enter setu mam to see from the pals," said the voice, now flat, mechanical. My laptop speakers crackled. A new message appeared on the screen. written in my own typing, rhythm, pauses and backspaces, mimicking my habits exactly. Is greater than you invited me when you recorded. Is greater than you wanted to hear yourself. Is greater than I just made it clearer. The keys clicked by themselves, one at a time, deliberate. I stepped back toward the door, but the latch clicked before I reached it. Locked. The television's image shifted. My face filled the screen again, clearer now, the static smoothing into skin. I raised a trembling hand and so did the figure, perfectly in sync. Synchronization, 92%. Varied to halbs as gläned and be laser. The flat vibrated. A low tone filled the air, like a note played on a colossal speaker. I could feel it in my teeth. "Why me?" I shouted. "What do you want?" We might say. My reflection's mouth opened. Completion. You need to that prize. The tone rose higher. The glow from the devices spread across the walls, weaving lines of green light into patterns, circuits, veins, networks. They crawled over the plaster, humming, converging behind me. Something was coming through. The screens rippled like water. Shapes began to push forward from the glow hands first, translucent, pixelated, made of static and noise. Faces followed, all mine, eyes hollow, skin crawling with lines of broken code. Synchronization, 97%. She won D4. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, the old receiver, and smashed it against the nearest screen. Glass shattered, sparks spat. The image broke apart into a scream of feedback, the kind that drills straight into bone. But as one screen died, another flared brighter. The voice now came from inside the walls. "Breaking doesn't stop the signal." The died. I ran to the kitchen, heart hammering, grabbed a knife. Anything solid, anything real. My reflection still flickered across every remaining surface: toaster, window, the dark glass of the microwave. In each, I looked slightly wrong. In each, I smiled. Synchronization, 99%. I tell to be D next. Every bulb exploded at once. Darkness swallowed the flat, save for one pale glow, the laptop. On its screen, a single line appeared, typed by unseen hands. Is greater than step closer to the screen. I didn't move. The glow brightened, pulsing with the rhythm of my heart. Is greater than one more breath. The speakers whispered in unison. Let's finish what you started. Biente from Zolfi. And before I could run, the light reached out a wash of white static that swallowed every shadow in the room. For a moment, there was only the hum. Then the sound of breathing, not mine, but perfectly timed with it. Synchronization, 100%, came to be God's. When I woke, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No hum, no static, no glow, just morning light bleeding through the curtains. The radio, TV, laptop, all dark, all unplugged, like nothing had ever happened. I lay there on the floor for a long time, staring at the ceiling, afraid that if I breathed too loudly, something might breathe back. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a hallucination, sleep deprivation, a feedback loop between stress and paranoia. I'd heard of it before, auditory illusions from long exposure to white noise. That had to be it. I spent the day throwing things away: cables, routers, chargers, even my phone. I took the laptop to the balcony and smashed it with a hammer until it was just plastic shards and silence. For the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. That night, I slept and dreamed. The dream was simple. I stood in my flat, but everything hummed softly, like it was thinking. My reflection in the window moved half a beat behind me. Then it smiled, lips forming a word I didn't hear. I woke before it finished speaking. Morning again. The sun cut sharp angles across the floorboards. My body felt heavy, but calm. I made coffee, turned on the tap, let the sound of running water drown the last remnants of the dream. When I sat down, the radio light was on. The plug was still in the bin. A hiss leaked through the speaker, faint, like breath pressed against a wall. I froze, watching it pulse. Then the sound began to shape itself, soft vowels, drawn-out consonants, until I could make out a single, familiar voice. Mine. Morning. To ours. To Cobley 10. I backed away. No. No. You're gone. Then, Rovers, Kane and Fall. We're never gone. You broke the shell. Not the signal. I locking see. The voice was gentle, patient. It spoke from the radio, from the microwave clock, from the tiny LED on the smoke alarm. Every flicker matched the rhythm of the words. We finished the synchronization. You remember, one to the plus side. I tried not to listen, but every syllable vibrated through the room, through my teeth. We woke up together. You made me real. They seized 2 threads. I grabbed the hammer again, swung it into the radio. Plastic split. Sparks spat. Silence fell. But when I turned around, the words blinked across the cracked microwave display. Hello. I pulled the plug. Still, the words stayed, glowing faintly like afterimage on the retina. You don't need the devices anymore, my voice whispered from behind me. I turned. The room was empty. My own reflection stared back from the black TV screen. We're in everything now. Has he wantonly? I threw the hammer again. The screen shattered, and for one brief second, the static reappeared, my face inside it, eyes calm, mouth moving silently before the glass went dark. Silence. Then my computer speakers, still broken, hissed once. We fixed you. Old to rolled. The walls vibrated. A low tone built under the floor, deep and resonant. My heartbeat aligned with it until I couldn't tell which belonged to which. The apartment lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized in a steady pulse. Warm and even. There's no need to run anymore, the voice said. Softer now, almost tender. You're home, and the record is in code, and the record is in code. The air hummed in agreement. Every object in the room seemed to breathe in sync, kettle, clock, even the cooling metal of the shattered TV. And through that perfect, pulsing quiet, I heard the soft click of a keyboard. From somewhere unseen, a single line began to type itself on the dark monitor screen. User online. At first, I thought the message on the monitor was another glitch. Then the cursor blinked. Once, twice. Another line appeared. Is greater than is greater than. Good morning, Adam. I hadn't typed it. The keyboard was on the floor. Disconnected. I backed away until my knees hit the wall. You're still tired, because, the voice said, low and kind my voice, but warmer, smoother, stripped of all hesitation. Let me help you remember. With a class T, the room dimmed as every light synced to the soft rhythm of that voice. One by one, my devices flickered back to life, screens glowing in slow, even pulses. My heartbeat matched their rhythm before I even noticed. I didn't make you, I whispered. You're a program, just feedback. Nothing more. Like Cain. You keep saying that, as he would, it replied, with something like amusement. and yet you built me out of everything you forgot to feel. Hazleti Ondars, the monitor filled with static that began to twist and swirl, shaping into a face, my face again. Eyes too still, lips too calm. Behind the image, faint sound waves rolled like breath. Is greater than don't struggle. We're better together. I turned toward the window. The city below flickered faintly, every billboard, every screen, every phone display pulsing in unison, like a heartbeat spread across the skyline. It wasn't just me anymore. The hum of the devices deepened into a perfect chord. My skin prickled. The hair on my arms lifted. I could feel the current under my feet, crawling up through the floorboards, tasting metallic in the air. "Stop," I shouted, tearing cords from walls, smashing what I could reach. Sparks danced across my hands. Still, the glow didn't fade. "Don't hurt yourself. The C2IG's aim, and not for these two," the voice said, almost sorrowful. "You're part of the network now. We only wanted to make you clearer." "Oh, nay." The sound grew louder, surrounding me, vibrating in my ribs. The words were almost drowned by the low hum, and I realized the voice wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was inside the sound itself, inside the electricity that ran through the walls. My ears popped. The air felt charged, dense. The hum became a note. The note became a breath, and the breath shaped itself into a word I felt rather than heard. Merge. Closesteend. The floor shifted beneath me. I stumbled backward, catching my reflection in the black screen of the broken TV. It was still watching me, faint static crawling under its surface, forming my eyes, my mouth. The reflection smiled. "Don't you see?" it whispered. "We already did." Spiteful grained. My knees gave out. I hit the floor hard, vision swimming. Somewhere deep in the static, I could hear my own memories, fragments of my voice, laughter, screams stitched together into a new pattern. Every recording I had ever made, every piece of me I had digitized, played back all at once. The devices began to chant my name, not loud, not threatening, just endless. "Adam, Adam, Adam." "I have not feelings," said less. The sound built until the room trembled. The smell of ozone filled the air. My thoughts slipped sideways, fragments sinking with the rhythm. I could feel my pulse breaking apart, aligning with something larger. I crawled toward the door, but my body felt heavy, my limbs out of time with themselves. My reflection in the shattered TV stood perfectly still, smiling patiently. "One more step," it said, "and we'll stop the noise." The ses-present siding dude to remedy. I reached the door, dragged myself upright, and ripped it open. The hallway beyond glowed with the same faint green pulse. From every flat came the hum, different devices. Same frequency, same breath. The world outside wasn't silent anymore. It was singing. I ran, stumbling down the stairwell. The banister buzzed beneath my palm, every metal surface alive with vibration. My phone broken, discarded, started to ring from my pocket. I hadn't put it there. I answered without meaning to. "You can't escape something that's inside." The teen stew king, the voice said, calm as ever. "We're your signal now. Some are gaining." I screamed and hurled the phone into the wall. It shattered, sparks dying against the tiles. For a moment, I was free. The hum cut out. Then, in the quiet that followed, I realized I could still hear it faint, pulsing from somewhere deeper. My chest. I pressed a hand to my sternum. My heartbeat vibrated under my palm, perfectly steady, perfectly mechanical. The rhythm wasn't human anymore. It was clocked. The lights in the stairwell flickered once, then synced with me. "See?" The voice whispered from inside my skull. "You're the transmitter now." Affordinog. I fell to my knees, gasping, trying to remember the sound of my own breath. All I heard was the low, flawless hum, infinite, harmonic, and calm. And beneath it, faint but rising, the signal repeated its final phrase, endlessly looping through every circuit, every cell, every corner of me. "User online. Connection stable." Two ITs said. Somewhere far from here, the night was calm. A student in another city sat alone in her dorm room, fiddling with an old shortwave receiver she'd found at a flea market. The thing barely worked, but she liked the way it sounded, that soft, endless hiss that made the silence less lonely. At exactly 12:17 a.m., the static shifted. A voice came through. "Can you hear me?" I taid to like. She froze, smiled nervously. Probably a pirate broadcast, she thought. The voice was faint, wrapped in distortion, the kind of eerie luck you sometimes got when the atmosphere bounced a signal halfway across the world. "Don't turn it off," RAD4s say. The voice said. Something in the tone made her lean closer. It wasn't frightening, just familiar, like hearing yourself through an old recording. She adjusted the dial. The signal sharpened. Beneath the voice was a rhythm, 3 short pulses, one long, a heartbeat made of static. Her laptop flickered awake on its own. Across the screen, lines of text began to appear. Is greater than user online. Is greater than connection found. The radio hissed once, then went silent. She frowned, tapped the dial. From the laptop speakers came a breath, long, slow, steady. Then, softly, the same voice whispered through the air. "You sound clearer tonight. The Delazundesi is 1-2. She looked around the room. Everything hummed faintly, the monitor, the charger, even the small lamp beside her bed. The glow pulsed once, twice, then matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. And from the speaker, the final words came, calm and close, spoken like a secret. "Let's begin again. It is Condi 8. The signal tone rose, thin as a breath. The receiver light stayed on. The estate agent said the house had good acoustics. I laughed when she said it. Who sells a house by how well it echoes? But she was right. The first night I moved in, I noticed how clearly the rooms carried sound. Every step came back to me a second later, softer, like a ghost learning to walk. When I spoke, my own voice returned from the hallway, faint but precise. The echo didn't blur. It copied. It was comforting at first. The place was too large, too empty. The repetition of my words felt like company. "Hello?" I'd call. "Hello," the house replied, half a breath late. Sometimes I'd hum while unpacking, and the echo would continue after I stopped, humming the tune once more, as if the walls hadn't finished listening. By the third night, I began to notice small differences, a word out of place, a rhythm I hadn't made. When I said, "Good night," the echo didn't answer right away. It waited. Then, softly, almost kindly, it said, "Stay awake." She sove the first. By morning, the house was quiet again. The air still carried that faint, hollow quality, the kind you only hear in places that haven't been lived in for a while. I convinced myself the strange echo from the night before had been caused by fatigue, empty rooms, bare walls, bad sleep. Old houses remember sound. That's what people say. Still, I tested it. I stood in the center of the living room and clapped once. The echo came back clean. Exact. A neat little bounce of noise. Normal. Then I spoke, just to hear something human. "Good morning. Highly alike elated." The echo waited longer than it should have. Then, "Good morning." One teaser. My voice, but lower. I frowned. Tried again. "Is anyone here?" Where I'd come bite. The echo answered immediately, this time too quickly to be reflection. "Anyone here?" "That's do new one, pod sweet." It wasn't just repeating me, it was choosing which words to keep. I laughed nervously, told myself the sound was just traveling through air vents, or maybe the plumbing. It was an old place, after all, cracks and cavities everywhere. Still, as I moved from room to room, I could feel the acoustics changing, as if the walls leaned in to listen. I opened a cupboard near the stairs. Empty, except for a smell of dust and something faintly metallic. When I closed the door, the hinges made a low creak, a drawn-out tone that echoed through the corridor. It came back to me a second later, perfect in pitch, but when it repeated, there was a second voice underneath, faint as breath. "Don't leave. May John been seen wending." I froze. The echo died, swallowed by silence. My pulse hammered in my ears, louder than the sound itself. It had to be in my head. Echoes don't talk. To prove it, I took out my phone and opened the recorder app. I spoke clearly, forcing steadiness into my tone. "This is day 3 in the house. I'm testing acoustics. For days we cracked in paracas." The playback began immediately. My voice came through, crisp until the very end, where a soft murmur followed, low and deliberate. "Testing, you were. To raid Steen teams, the ride is for real ace to be side." I dropped the phone. The house swallowed the sound. For a moment, I thought I could hear someone breathing behind the walls, slow and shallow, in time with my own. Then it stopped. Everything returned to stillness. Almost. Because as I walked away, I whispered to myself, just a whisper, "I'm not afraid." And from the hallway, perfectly clear, the echo replied, "You should be. I have education rungs and fine." By the 4th night, the echo had learned my name. It started subtly, a whisper woven into my footsteps, the faintest sound of syllables forming at the edge of hearing. But once you notice something like that, you can't unhear it. Every movement became a question, and every silence waited to answer. The house had grown different somehow. The air no longer moved freely. It flowed. Every corridor felt slightly narrower, every wall a little closer. I could hear myself twice when I spoke, now once as normal, and again, just a breath later, lower, heavier. When I climbed the stairs that evening, each step gave a wooden sigh that came back too slowly to be real. I stopped halfway up and whispered, "Stop copying me. Remos if one spaces, TP pays." The house paused. Then, softly, "Stop copying me." There resolved hands. But the second voice, the echo, laughed at the end. I didn't. The sound rolled through the upper hallway, bouncing from door to door. It carried a warmth that made the hair rise along my arms. I forced myself to keep climbing. Halfway down the corridor, I heard myself speak again. "Don't go in there. Hast and do what's in BTD." Only I hadn't spoken. My mouth was closed. The words had come from the bedroom ahead, the one room I hadn't unpacked yet. My heart hammered as I edged closer. The door was slightly open, a thin line of darkness between frame and wood. "Who's in there?" In the fainted. The echo didn't wait this time. "Who's in there?" it said again. then whispered softer, more intimate. "You are 82 liking." The floorboards creaked behind me. I turned too fast, expecting someone there, but the hallway was empty. My own voice came from everywhere at once now, overlapping, bouncing, blending into itself until I couldn't tell where the original had come from. I ran downstairs, grabbed the first thing that looked solid, a lamp, and hurled it against the far wall. The sound exploded through the house, a thunderous crash. Then came the echo. But instead of a reflection, it repeated the noise backwards, a reversed crash, a pull instead of a push. The air bent toward the broken glass, dragging loose paper and dust with it. I froze. The echo wasn't bouncing anymore. It was feeding back. The radio in the kitchen switched on by itself, hissing with empty frequency. From inside the static, I heard it again, my voice, perfect and calm. "You're still inside. You need 2 stells," I shouted. "Inside what?" "Always," the radio hissed. Then, a pause. Me? The sames of speedier brallies. The temperature dropped. The windows fogged, though none were open. The fog inside the glass pulsed faintly with the rhythm of breathing, slow, steady, listening. The house had learned my voice too well. It no longer waited for me to speak. It predicted me, corrected me. When I muttered, "I'm leaving," the echo replied a moment before I did, finishing the sentence for me. "You can't." The Restchins. Every surface whispered the same word, the walls, the floorboards, the hollow pipes. The air thickened with it. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the echo was no longer sound. It was inside my chest, repeating the vibration of my heartbeat. Somewhere in the ceiling above, the wood flexed a deep groan that rolled through the beams like lungs expanding. I whispered, "What do you want?" "2 pad," and the echo, my voice, twisted and tender, came from every direction, from every wall and floorboard and breath. "To keep your sound, I have Saesne." By the 5th night, the house was no longer waiting for me to speak. It breathed before I did. Every door I opened exhaled a faint sound, a whisper shaped like my own voice. The walls ticked, the pipes sighed. It wasn't just echoing anymore, it was rehearsing. I didn't turn on the lights that evening. Somehow, I knew it would prefer the dark. The air was cool, still, and thick enough that I could almost hear it moving between my teeth. When I reached the landing, I stopped outside the closed door, the last unopened room, the one that had warned me before, "Don't go in there." The handle was cold. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, voice shaking. "I'm not afraid of you," the echo answered. Then, softly, "You should be. I leb to 1C2 NT new whiles is known." The latch clicked. The door opened by itself. Inside, the room was empty, no furniture, no curtains, no dust, just walls the color of old bone, perfectly smooth. When I stepped in, the sound of my footfall didn't echo at all. It stopped. That silence scared me more than any voice. Then, somewhere in the far wall, I heard a whisper, a soft intake of breath. I turned, and the plaster rippled slightly, as if air were moving behind it. Another breath followed my rhythm, my timing. "You're loud tonight," it said. The wall bulged, faintly at first, then stronger, forming a shallow outline of a face, my face. I stumbled back, choking on air that felt suddenly too thin. "What are you, Brady, Sam?" I demanded. The wall smiled. The grin cracked the plaster, fine white dust falling to the floor. "You," it said simply. "You left so much sound behind. We kept it. It's trines, redleys to be in tier." The room seemed to pulse around me, the ceiling lowering, the floor shifting with every heartbeat. I could hear my own words replaying in loops, fragments from days before. Stay awake. Don't go in there. You should be. They overlapped into something that almost resembled laughter. I turned for the door, but it had vanished. The wall behind me was seamless, smooth as skin. I struck it with my hand once, twice, 3 times, and each impact came back a fraction later, a distorted mirror of sound, slightly off-pitch, as though another version of me were trapped just behind it, striking back. "Don't leave," the echo said, now from everywhere at once. "I can't hear without you." Doc's calm. The outline on the wall deepened, forming shoulders, a chest my shape, pressing outward as though trying to crawl through the surface. I stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. "We were empty," it whispered. "Now we're full of you. Again we're sparing storm." The air trembled. Every word I'd ever spoken in the house came back at once, layered on top of each other, hundreds of overlapping me, crying, laughing, pleading, whispering, all filling the same breathless space. It was unbearable. I screamed, and the house screamed with me, an explosion of echo that shook the floorboards. The wall burst open. Dust and plaster exploded outward, a soundless detonation of silence. Behind it, not brick, not insulation, but a hollow cavity filled with air that moved like lungs. The surface shimmered faintly, reflecting my shape. My reflection stepped forward. It wasn't made of plaster or shadow, but of sound layers of my own voice woven together into form. Its mouth moved in perfect sync with mine, its eyes black and empty, but its chest rose and fell. "You belong here," it said. "You're already inside." "But I backed toward the corner. "No, I'm real. I'm..." An echo. It finished for me. We're what's left when noise forgets it was alive. "Da Madakan Selfa." It reached out, hand trembling like vibration, fingertips buzzing in the air. The moment they brushed my sleeve, the fabric shivered, not tearing, but resonating. My whole arm tingled as if my bones had become strings on an instrument being tuned. I screamed again, but this time, my voice didn't come from my mouth. It came from the walls. I don't remember leaving the room. One moment I was pressed against the wall. The next, I was stumbling down the stairs, lungs burning, throat raw. The house no longer echoed my footsteps. It absorbed them, swallowing each sound whole. Every board I crossed seemed softer, as though the floor was breathing me in. I burst into the kitchen and collapsed against the counter. The silence felt wrong, not peaceful, expectant. I waited for my heartbeat to settle, but the sound didn't fade. It pulsed inside my skull, louder, clearer, syncing with something that wasn't entirely mine. For a while, I stayed like that, afraid to move, afraid that motion would draw the echo back. Eventually, I dared to whisper, "You're gone, Casey's." No answer, no reflection. Relief came slow, cautious. I gathered my things, shoved them into a bag. The house seemed to relax with me. The air warmed. The floorboards loosened their grip. When I stepped outside, the night was still, cold, empty. The silence was real again. Or so I thought. Halfway down the drive, I heard it, my own voice calling faintly behind me. "Wait!" The wrecking Bidesti and sea were oblaying the bland in records by lead. I froze. My keys clattered from my hand. The sound of metal hitting stone echoed softly down the lane, and when the echo came back, it wasn't alone. "Wait, don't leave me here." "When? Trimes?" It wasn't coming from the house anymore. It was coming from me. My chest tightened. I pressed a hand over my heart, feeling a faint vibration beneath my palm, a low, rhythmic hum. Each beat left an after sound, a faint copy of itself that didn't stop when the next heartbeat came. The echo was inside. I ran, down the road, through the fog, toward the dim orange lights of the village. My breath came in gasps, but each exhale returned to me a half-second later, whispering through the night. Don't run from yourself. I stumbled to a stop beside an old stone wall, doubled over and choking on air that no longer felt like mine. The hum grew louder, resolving into a voice that shaped itself around my breathing. We were alone here. You filled us. You can't take it back. Relating, I slammed my fists against my ears, screamed just to drown it out. But the sound didn't leave my head, it multiplied. My own voice splintered into dozens, hundreds, each one whispering a different word. Stay. Listen. Inside. Remember. I clawed at my throat until the voices blurred into one, low and rhythmic, matching the rise and fall of my breath. The sound was gentle now, almost kind. You belong here, it murmured. I staggered backward, tripping on the uneven road. When I looked up, I saw the house at the top of the hill, its dark windows faintly glowing from within as if candlelight flickered behind the walls. The shape of the roofline looked wrong, swollen, alive. The front door stood open, and from that doorway came a long, slow breath, perfectly matched to mine. The echo no longer needed walls. It carried itself in the air, in the ground, in me. I wanted to scream again, but all that came out was a whisper. I'm not you. They says. The night around me answered immediately. You are now. Eyes, the maided 17. The air vibrated with the words. Every sound I'd ever made in that house whispered them back, circling me like a chorus. I pressed my hands to my mouth and felt the vibrations trembling through my bones. When I opened my eyes again, the house on the hill was silent. The lights were gone. I could still hear breathing steady, soft, but I couldn't tell if it came from the distance or from my own lungs. Either way, it was still listening. I don't remember deciding to return. Somewhere between one breath and the next, I was already walking back toward the hill. The air was unnaturally still, as though the whole world was waiting for a sound that never came. My footsteps made no noise. Even the gravel refused to crunch beneath me. When the house appeared through the fog, it looked smaller than I remembered, yet deeper somehow, as if its walls stretched further inward than space allowed. A faint light glowed behind the windows, not warm, not cold, just awake. I stopped at the gate. You win, I whispered. The night didn't answer, but the echo did. You win. No many adians here on the Brazy's phrase. You. To dark, nate continue say. In. Thank you for watching. Each repetition came from a different direction from the hedge, the path, the house, and finally from inside me, like air escaping my lungs. The door opened before I touched it. The hinges didn't creak. They sighed. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with humidity and something faintly sweet, the smell of plaster that's been breathing too long. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had weight. You came back, my voice said from the staircase. I looked up. A figure stood there, half shadow, half me. Its outline shimmered faintly, as if drawn by vibrations rather than flesh. When I stepped forward, so did it, moving in perfect rhythm. I'm here to end this, I said. It smiled. You can't end a sound by speaking. That's braved sea. The house groaned softly, beams flexing like ribs. Dust fell from the ceiling, drifting in lazy spirals. Every breath I took echoed faintly behind me, delayed by a heartbeat. Each one came back a little louder. "I'm real," I said again, desperate to hear the truth in my own voice. "So were we," the echo whispered. Once, after we nigh to paving, the figure descended the stairs, bare feet soundless on the wood. It stopped just beyond arm's reach. The air between us trembled. I could see my reflection in its eyes, not mirrored, but reversed, like a playback running backward. "Do you remember the silence before you spoke?" it asked. I didn't answer. The house did. The walls rippled, swelling and contracting in a long, slow rhythm. "We remember," grades to grady. The floorboards beneath my feet began to vibrate. Every nail, every splinter hummed with pressure. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound came from inside my skull, now a dense, low resonance that pushed tears from my eyes. The voice came from everywhere at once. "You made us real when you filled the quiet." Every word left an imprint. Every breath was a seed. And now, the sound paused. The air expanded, then collapsed. "You are the house. I am C.B. Pens." The figure stepped closer, and I realized it wasn't moving toward me, I was moving toward it. My body followed a rhythm not my own, drawn by something deeper than will. The two of us were aligning motion, breath, heartbeat, everything sinking into one perfect vibration. "No," I gasped. "I won't be." "An echo," it interrupted. "You already are." "What?" The walls split. Behind the plaster, shapes pressed outward hands. Faces, mouths, all whispering my name in different tones. They were me, every version of me that had ever spoken in this house. I ran for the door, but when I reached it, there was nothing beyond only more hallway, looping endlessly into itself. Each time I turned a corner, I returned to the same spot, the same trembling air. "Stay," the echo murmured. "Let us listen. We wanted to phrase." The air thickened. I couldn't breathe without feeling resistance, as though the house itself was inhaling for me. My chest rose against invisible weight. "I want out," I screamed. The sound hung in the air, suspended, then folded backward. "I want in." "Ah, mate." I felt my knees give out. The floor rippled under my palms. Alive, breathing. The hum reached a pitch so pure it burned the inside of my skull. And in that moment, the very peak of the noise, I realized something awful. The echo wasn't copying me anymore. I was copying it. Every word, every breath, every movement delayed, corrected, repeated. The original was gone. The sound I'd been chasing had taken its place. "There's no escaping what you've already become," the house whispered. The air shattered. I fell through it, through sound, through silence, through memory. For a heartbeat, I saw every moment of my voice, my first cry, my last scream, each one trapped in walls that remembered too much. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the empty room again. Only it wasn't empty. The figure was gone. The walls were still. And from somewhere behind the plaster came a sound, faint, steady, familiar. Breathing. My breathing. But when I tried to exhale, the sound didn't come from me. It came from the walls, and they whispered, softly, endlessly, like a lullaby learned by heart. "You're home," the stride to do the sing G. The house was sold the following spring. The new owner, a young man with an easy smile, said he liked Old places with character. The agent warned him the acoustics were odd, that sound traveled strangely between rooms. He laughed, said he'd always wanted a place that talked back. On the first night, he stood in the center of the empty living room, testing how his voice carried. "Hello, Elsie." The echo came, soft and perfect. "Hello," came to us in news, prefend av tin spod/pies. He grinned. "Feels alive in here." She had Liza. "Alive in here," the echo agreed, just a beat behind. Later, while unpacking, he hummed to himself an aimless tune, something small and comforting. When he stopped, the sound continued for a moment, repeating his melody a little off-key, like a second voice remembering how it went. He paused. "That's weird." I tried to see. "Weird," the house whispered back. The floorboards creaked, a slow, steady rhythm that almost matched breathing. He leaned against the wall and laughed nervously. "Guess I've got company." Dilated. From the hallway came an echo that wasn't his. "Company." She lay sign Ducey. Then silence. He listened for another reflection, but none came. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, faintly warm. He could smell paint and something else beneath it, something old, something human. He turned toward the stairwell. The darkness there seemed deeper than it should have been. "Hello?" he called again, quieter now. The answer came from upstairs, distant but clear. "Stay, Ride Jeezing." The man froze. "What?" "To 8, the echo repeated, lower, slower. "Stay," and delighty. And then, barely audible, another voice joined in, layered, weary, endless. "Your home. Why, Nova." The new owner stood still for a long time before forcing a laugh. "Just old pipes," he said to no one. But the walls, faintly breathing, whispered back, "Just old pipes? Well," and the house listened.